think Ali is going to be, I think he's going to come, you're going to come here to make your presentation, right? Yeah, we're good for now. So if we're, I think, is this on? Are we ready to go? I need a thumbs up from the tech team. We're good? It's on. It's on. Is it on? Louder. Is that better? Closer. Like that. Okay. So I can't go. Anyway, everyone, welcome. I'm very pleased to welcome you to the Climate Security for the Global Drylands side event at the CGIAR FAO Rockefeller Pavilion. Some quick housekeeping notes. We have 3 panelists online who may or may not make it through the session due to internet issues. And also because we are in a vibrant and dynamic atmosphere, I encourage you to speak loudly and articulately so we can hear everything you're saying. So today, we're looking forward to exploring how the global drylands can be used as a test case scenario where climate security will be felt the most and soonest. And so this event will help provide an opportunity to share agriculture options for the drylands for the future and now, and respond to the requirements to ensure an effective facilitating environment for future success. So, and we're also hoping that this event will show how implementing together through an integrated approach to agriculture will ensure the greatest success for climate security across the global drylands. So I would first like to introduce our panelists, some online as mentioned and some in person. The first I would like to welcome is Professor Ratan Lal, Distinguished University Professor of Soil Science and World Food Prize winner, Mr. Ali Abu Saba, Director General of ICARDA and Regional Director of the CWINA for the CGIAR, Ms. Dina Saleh, Regional Director for the Near East, North Africa and Europe Division for IFAD, Dr. Tarifa Al-Zabi, Director General for ICBA, who is joining us online, Professor Tim Benton, Research Director of Emerging Risks and Environment Society Program at the Chatham House, and Dr. Peter Laderat for Climate Action as a part of the CGIAR. And so without further ado, I would like to invite Ali up to the podium here to walk us through some options we have for a different farming approach for the global drylands.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today, our esteemed guests and panelists. I'm going to speak about, the whole issue of climate security for the global drylands. Next, please. The drylands is a very important part of the global system where food production is. If we can have the next slide, please. Oh, I need to click. My apology. So, but the drylands is also, this part of the world is facing some of the greatest challenges on the planet. We have the conflict and fragility at its highest level. There are the issue of malnutrition, which prevails in most of our countries. Apologies. Hello? Hello? Okay, good. So I was talking about malnutrition, which is really, it's at its highest level because of the nature of the food and the lack of sufficient nutritious food for the population, which is already very high and continues to increase. We have the issue of land degradation, which continues to expand. And the loss of biodiversity in the area as a result of overexploitation, but also rising heat and continued water scarcity. So these, combined with the climate change and variability, is really putting in place what we call the perfect storm. The perfect storm for, a lot of suffering that can happen for the people in the region. And we're only 7 harvests between now and the year 2030. So, some of the recent research done by the ICARDA scientists have demonstrated that the traditional areas known as the drylands over the past 15 to 20 years have been expanding. The heat have been rising. The traditional boundaries for the drylands have been going southwards. They are moving northwards. And also you can see in Asia how they are expanding. And that actually amplifies and the nature and the magnitude of the problem that we have. And we need to recognize that no, the external microphone.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you.
I think we need some coordination with our neighbors. Our apology, because otherwise it should be the person who speaks loudest who will be heard. Allow us momentarily to sort it out. I think we have the online. Can I ask the online participants to switch off their microphones, please? Tarifa, could you please switch off your microphones? Oh, thank you so much. Good. We will unmute your microphones as soon we're ready to receive you. So coming back to the drylands, with our sincere apology. The world's agriculture holds actually 2.7 billion people who are very active practicing agriculture. Now, one of the key challenges that you see from this picture is that the drylands are actually very vulnerable to also new forms of extreme weather events, increased drought periods, reduction in rainfall, sandstorms have become more frequent, and this is causing major and serious problems for the farmers in the region. They don't know what to plant, they don't know when to plant, how much water to put, and they are actually using opportunistically anytime there is rainfall. So what we are trying to do within the CGIAR in working with many partners, and we have a very important key partner with us in the room, Dr. Ibrahim Al-Dukhari from the AOAD, is to try to introduce the integrated desert farming concept, which is a way to integrate the different production systems within a desert context, bringing them together to allow the farmers to increase their incomes, improve their livelihoods, but also provide a more resilient sources of livelihood. So the general situation here requires that you look at a differentiated approach to the countries we serve. So you cannot introduce this concept in Egypt the same way you introduce it in Morocco or in the Gulf countries. You have to look at the particular environment. You have to look at the availability of the natural resource. Even when you look at the trees as part of the essential desert system, maybe in the Gulf countries you have the date palm in many parts of North African countries. But you also need to look at the olive trees, you need to look at the fig trees, and then more broadly look at the production system. What kind of fodder alternatives that you can bring into a very dry environment. So we've been looking at cactus, for example, as an important source alternative for the feed of the people in this area. Within a context of water scarce conditions, we've been looking at protected agriculture. How would you maximize the use of water and recycle it a number of times? And then within this context, when water is so precious, how do you look at aquaculture so that you're able to extract the water, use it to do fish farming, use it and circulate it up to 6 times, and then discharge it into the production system with a lot more nutrients so that you're able to reduce the chemical and pesticides used in the process and be able to produce a lot more food. And we have seen actually situations where when these system components are brought together, you're also able to leverage the off-grid solutions through solar systems. You're able to introduce new innovations and technologies that have been promoted and developed together with MIT from the US, like these ultra-low drip emissions that uses only 10% of the total energy compared to a normal drip irrigation systems. And then how would you look at a variety of trees? You have date palm, which is really the centerpiece for any desert farming system. How would you look at the cactus? How would you look at the animals beyond the camels? Camels can eat cactus very well, up to 1/3 of what it consume, but you need also for additional sources of nutrition, because of course cactus provides water, it provides fodder, but it does not provide all the nutrients that you need for us to be able to do that. So down there, we've been looking within the GCC countries at alternative forms of fodder that can use less water. And we're also able to look at the context of small ruminants, sheep and goat, together with the camels, that together within a bigger system and through water harvesting techniques, you can actually have in place a quite productive system given the environment and overall situation in the desert. So these are the four components of the system, and the opportunities that present themselves within the context of desert farming. You have the water resources management, including leveraging of the remote sensing and digital technology that you're able to actually manage the resources in a much better. You are also able to look at sustainable scaling of climate-adapted crop, livestock, and systems. And the beauty here being among the one CGIAR that we are able to bring in knowledge from across the CGIAR. It's not only the dryland crops that we have, but there may be some good options in Latin America, in India, in South Asia, in many other parts of the world that have, can be brought into the region based on similarity mapping and testing. And when you bring in all of these elements together, then you're able to look at also opportunities for regreening of the degraded lands. The concept that was promoted by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, you've all seen some of the announcements, is extremely interesting. And these are the opportunities when you have the big muscle of a major countries in the region trying to put, then our role of the CGIAR is to put on the table the kind of technologies, working with all the partners, private sector, non-governmental organizations, to be able to actually implement these concepts. The challenges, of course, are known to all of you, but here is not really to tell you more about the challenges, but to actually share with you the kind of issues we have to deal with as you design functional desert integrated farming systems. Of course, what is needed is to consolidate the knowledge from across the CGIAR. For the beginning of this concept, we were working with World Fish, bringing aquaculture, we're bringing with IMI, we're working with IFPRI on the policy dimension together with ICARD, and the four of us are looking at options for agri-food systems in the global drylands beyond the narrow scope of looking only at the crops or only at the small ruminants, and of course resources needed for scaling up. So here the role of countries, donors, partner institutions will be key. I'm going to stop here in the interest of time, and thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you. Back to you, moderator.
Thank you very much. Oops. Thank you very much. Is this on? Sorry, guys. Thank you very much, Ali, for your ideas and vision for the integrated desert farming for the global drylands. And it's clear that coming together and bringing diverse disciplines and options is really the way we need to move in partnership. So to kick off our panel discussions, I'd first like to ask Professor Ratan Lal, who's online, if he could share maybe, he's seen many challenges and changes in research. He's seen many different approaches to agriculture and changes in innovations and policies. So Professor Lal, what in your view are the things that you think we need to do now more than ever to ensure long-term sustainability and stability in the global drylands in the face of the climate change? If you could unmute Professor Lal. Please unmute. Great, thank you. Yes, we can, perfect. Yeah.
Presentation by Professor Ali Abdul-Sabah was excellent. He gave the overview. I think one of the need of the time is translating science into action. That is the important part. We have tremendous knowledge obtained from the CGIAR system, especially ICARD, many other national centers as well. How to translate into action and scale up by involving definitely the private sectors who can help make the technology accessible to all farmers. Obviously linking with policymakers and academicians, translating science into action is equally important. But at the same time, also trying to involve education and general public in understanding what are the potential, what are the opportunities that exist, and how to harness them. Education especially plays a very important part. And I do not necessarily mean conventional education. It could be education within the community, of the farmers, land managers, and of course the policy makers as well. Just to give a few examples, just very briefly, of the wet technology, understanding what is the drought. People mentioned that the drought and heat wave are going to become increasingly more intense. So understanding the type of drought, whether it's a climatological, let's say hydrological, pedological, agronomic, social, is very important. Similarly, understanding what are the types of water available. If it's a brackish water, how to properly desalinize water by appropriate means, including seawater and using it for drip irrigation, as I mentioned. Also, we need to think about transport, export of virtual water contained in the commodity that we produce in the dry land. So, identifying those species and crops for export purposes which have a low virtual water would be a very good option to save those. I think finally, to motivate farmers to adopt what we know, compensating for ecosystem services, whether it's restoring degraded lands and desertified lands, whether it's saving water, that's it, improving water quality and renewability, improving biodiversity perhaps in the dry land. Farmers should be rewarded, compensated as a part of promoting science-based proven technology. I think with that, the farmers, the land managers, the policymakers, private sector, I would like to bring we can translate science into action. Thank you. Back to the moderator, please.
Thank you, Professor Lal. I think we had a few glitches near the end, but we definitely had your main examples, your main thrust, which is we really need to come together. As you said, we need to look at new ways of managing water. And perhaps most importantly, and I think maybe we're hopefully moving more towards now, is how do we engage farmers and compensate them for applying the research-based technologies, which I think we are all working to do, but perhaps that's, or certainly that's a way we need to think of going forward to really make the steps and strides we need in climate change in the face of drylands. So thank you very much for that. Moving back to the non-online portion, I'd like to ask you, Professor Benton, so integrated desert farming, it provides a potential to sustain and grow agriculture needs and then to meet demand. And so what are the additional threats to dryland agriculture, with the intensification and effect on soil fertility that might arise from this approach? And kind of what technologies can we use to mitigate these actions? Obviously, Professor Lal brought up how do we manage water more resourcefully? How can we ensure that soil is more fertile? So if you'd like to share a few thoughts on that, that would be great. Thank you.
Hello? Yeah, it works. That's a very, very broad question, but I'd like to start picking away at it by asking the question, what is agriculture for? Because if agriculture is there to meet the demand from the market, there is always going to be a trade-off between maximizing the value of economic returns to the farmers and how much they can externalize costs through unsustainable use of resources and degrading soils and so on in the name of short-term gains for long-term sustainability and resilience. So one of the key things from my perspective is not just about innovation in agriculture, but it's also about innovation in markets. So as Ratan Lal has just said, farmers get the rewards that are necessary to deliver what they need to do on the ground to build sustainable and resilient agriculture. And often that comes at a cost to immediate productivity in the short term. So from my perspective, part of the solution is not just about technology of agricultural production, but it's asking the question, how can we structure markets right to get the incentives for farmers to produce the right sorts of goods in the right sorts of ways? And that might be growing different crops, it might be growing different amounts of crops, it might be growing a whole lot of things that at the moment the market does not incentivize. So on a global basis, for example, the world only produces about a third of the fruit and vegetables that is needed if everyone were to have a healthy diet, because that's because the market rewards commodity crop growing, particularly grains grown in excess around the world, relative to fruit and vegetables and other products that are very much pro-nutrition. So how can we get the market right, and what innovations do we need? Technological governance, subsidies, market encouragement, building cooperatives, getting the demand side right to allow farmers to get rewarded from growing the right sorts of things in the right sorts of ways. So whilst there is a focus on things like precision irrigation, water storage, soil management, agroforestry, integrated farming, and so on, those will not deliver at scale for a sustainable and resilient food system until we get the demand side right. So make the markets pull the right sorts of things, reward farmers for growing things in the right sort of way. So there's a whole lot of things around food environments, market incentives, supports in the right place, cold chains, storage technologies, and so on, as well as thinking about what farmers do on the ground to deliver what we need in the long term, which is resilience, sustainability, pro-nutrition, providing livelihoods for farmers. So I think I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you very much, Professor Benton. And certainly, obviously, supporting proper markets, we've heard quite a lot, certainly in the opening plenary yesterday, we need effective financing. We need both private and public sector financing, and we certainly need countries that have the money to distribute money in a more effective way to those countries which need money to really bring the technologies, bring the innovation. So top to tail, whether it's cold chain development or what it is, and also the financing to ensure that there are proper resources in place.
But if I can just follow up on that, it's not just about financing.
No.
It's also about things like putting subsidies in the right sort of place, avoiding too many subsidies in the global north on grain, depressing the price of grain, driving up demand for calories rather than nutrition. And when I say restructuring markets, the traditional thing in the rich world is to say, oh, we've got to persuade consumers to buy different things. But it's not that. It's putting in the right place the subsidies. So if on a global basis, we did some modeling a few years ago, if we took all the subsidies off grain and put them on fruit and vegetables, on a this is not a dryland specific, but if you put them on fruit and vegetables would become more available, prices would go down, cheap calories on a global basis would become more expensive, waste would go down, and you'd end up restructuring markets to make it easier for the pull to be pro-nutrition on a global basis. So it's not just about putting finance in, it's putting taxes in the right place, it's getting trade policy right, because every country's food system is partially what they grow locally, but it's also influenced by what other people grow, and therefore global market prices, input prices, and so on.
Right. Thank you very much for that clarification. So, Dr. Tarifa, it seems like we've already started to, this may be an easy lead into kind of where I'd like to discuss with you. So we're talking about subsidies, we're talking about financing in the right place, and also then what are the potential areas for growth in GDP and direct and indirect benefits to a more integrated approach to agriculture, such as social stability, education, and others. But what are the challenges then? What are these additional how are these additional areas complemented? And then how can country or research organization contribute to these benefits? Have we lost our online? Okay, Dina. So we've lost our online. So, I mean, Dina, I'm very happy if you'd like to kind of basically riff on what Dr. Benton's been mentioning, but also kind of let's teasing out what are the models that you're in view could be scaled for implementation, and what are the barriers to this. So whether this is model of financing, model of scaling technologies, model of policy options and things like that, I'd be very happy to hear your view.
Progress. Start at the beginning.
One thing's for sure, you won't lose your live participants. So, can you hear me? Is it clear? All right, I'll try to. I see they're back. Well, let me go back, a step back to Dr. Ali's presentation. And he was talking about integrated desert farming systems. And I think that's the model that I think I would start with. To begin with, we, as you were saying, Professor, financing drylands is a costly investment. And you do have the barriers that Dr. Ali mentioned, migration being one of them. It's very hard to attract people to move and settle into drylands. This is one barrier. The other barrier is also the cost of investment. Now, if you want to make an integrated desert farming system attractive and you want to actually make it bankable, you need to find, as you said, context-specific solutions, but also we need to think about what is needed in terms of investment. So you do need players. The first players you need are, of course, to set the stage, is the public sector. Because the private sector is driven by profits, is driven by, of course, a bankable opportunity where they see a business opportunity. So I think the role here that, and I would say IFAD in that sense has been using, is where the public sector comes in, sets the ground, produces, sort of the environment that could then attract and leverage the private sector and bring in then the incentives that we're talking about, the policies that need the right policies. We need the technologies. You need synergies between innovations, policies, institutions, input supplies, credits. All that need to come together. But one thing that I would like to also mention here is, and maybe the best way of explaining it is an example from an IFAD project in Egypt. The government of Egypt has been reclaiming some of the desert lands, which are called the new lands. And what IFAD did, and I think this was a really smart idea by the government, was where this land was allocated to young graduates. So they had the right level of education, literacy, so they were ready for that type of investment. And IFAD and government came together to put in the public infrastructure. And it was one of the first times that IFAD went into not just productive agricultural infrastructure, but also social infrastructure. So building schools, building health clinics, building, electrification, roads. So we went into a integrated approach for rural development. And within no time, the private sector came on their own. So we had, the Italian private sector building a mozzarella processing factory. We had Heinz coming in, doing contract farming with tomato producers. So it was, automatic leveraging, crowding in of private sector. And I think this is a perfect example how your desert land is a real opportunity when you have all the right ingredients coming to play. So I'll stop there, and I think that could give you a good idea of what we do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, and it's nice too to ground this idea. How do we expand from where we are now, and how can we envision it for the future? Dr. Tarif, I think you're online now. We lost you just as I was asking questions. Apologies for that. So changing the approach a little bit slightly. So of everything you've heard and these approaches that you've heard, and obviously from a research perspective, from a different drylands research perspective, how does this work? How do you see this being taken forward, whether in where you are or kind of as a broader context scaling throughout the global drylands?
Well, I'm glad to be back. Good afternoon, everyone. If we want to start, again, I'll start from where everyone ended by confirming that desert farming can be a key driver of economic growth in rural areas. And farmers are key in this, and we heard this by saying how can we really engage and empower farmers, because this is the areas where we need them to be aware of the scarce resources that we are dealing with in such environment, and also trying to make sure that the adaptation to all those innovative ideas stays sustainable. From a research perspectives, again, we are trying to identify solutions that will be, I would say, efficient in terms of implementation. We're trying to bridge the gap between the basic research, applied research, and innovation and application. A lot of developmental projects take into consideration the socio-economic impacts of all those ideas when it comes to the integrated farming. So we look at ways that we think, first of all, farmer will be able to understand and adopt. We're looking again our areas. We look at the challenges and the gap available. Middle East and North Africa are water scarce countries. I mean, 12 out of the 17 most water stressed countries fall in Middle East and North Africa. We are hit by the climate change. There are so many challenges that we are all aware of, and they are impacting the traditional farming. So we looked at, again, from the center, we are International Center for Land Agriculture. So we looked at alternative sources of water. The idea is, how can we really ensure that water is being managed in the right way. We introduced data management system where people know exactly how much they irrigate and how do they irrigate. We are also looking at alternative crops. And when we speak about alternative crops, we are also looking at crops that are stress resilient. Our crops can sustain drought, heat, and salinity at the same time. And we look through the partnership with the private sector as well as the integrated research we do at the soil amendment. What can we really look at the texture of the soil in the desert, and how can we really make sure that the sand is suitable and areas that can be used for farming. Last is we touched base earlier on the protected agriculture. And when it comes to protected agriculture, of course, we're looking at what would be most efficient also when it comes to the energy utilization. So through the different examples we have introduced in more than 40 countries around the world, we are looking at ways where we can integrate the use of the desalinated water, looking at the fresh water or saline water in agriculture, having fish tank incorporated in the agricultural system, and introducing holophytic crops and stress resilient crops that will be good for the farmers to adopt. These are areas where we've noticed that converting the basic science into implementation and developmental projects where it causes farmers self-sufficiency when it comes to production of those crops. We look at ways where we introduce different concepts of agropreneurship. Again, we wanted to engage youth and make sure that bridge the gap between science and society, and also look at how can we really engage women in the process and ensure that women are trained. And most important things when it comes to bridging the gap between the science and society, also the knowledge transfer, and how can we really make sure that we do capacity development programs where we ensure that farmers are and stakeholders, even policymakers, by the way, the part of, again, being our stakeholders in this, how are we promoting for the knowledge transfer to bridge the gap and ensure that whatever adoption happens is sustainable for the long run.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tarifa. And thank you bringing, especially to the fore, which we hadn't addressed yet, is the agripreneurship. And certainly bringing in women and youth, which was touched upon by Dina as well. I think, I mean, if the youth are the future, and I'm quickly moving out of my youth, we really have to invest rapidly to take that forward and to help ensure that what we're doing now, it really is for the future. And the future is not 50 years from now. The future is next year. The future is already this year. And without proper implementation, then we risk all the future for all of us. So thank you very much. I'd like to now move to Peter, who's been very quiet and waiting patiently. Agriculture serves as an important backbone to security and growth in the global drylands. We know this. We've heard this already today. We know this from the work that we do. So could you share a bit more about how conflict-sensitive policies really do support stability and growth, and how those policies aren't just about country security, but what does it mean about food security, transport security, people security, and water security, and things like that? Over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. So just a construction started here next door. I hope it's not going to disturb too much. But now it's great to bring the discussion to climate security, since this is also the title of the session. So when we talk about climate security, it's the notion that climate exacerbates the underlying drivers of conflict and insecurity. So we're not talking necessarily about that there's less rain and then there will be a war, but it's like all those linkages. For example, we of course all agree that climate has an impact on agricultural production, and then agricultural production can have an impact on food insecurity, which can have an impact on human insecurity overall. So in that sense, the black box security, everything that happens there has to do with water, with land, water, and food systems, and that's also what the CGIAR is focusing on. So it's like rural areas and the activities, the livelihoods in land, water, and food systems. And so when we look at the policies across different countries, what we see is that oftentimes, most often, the climate policies, they don't reference or refer to peace and security and vice versa. So there's some side. Of course, climate security is also a bit of a new topic and awareness, but we really need to align those policies to reference to each other and make sure that policies and then implementations have like common objectives and goals to at the same time adapt and mitigate to climate change, but also contribute to peace building. And so this is very important also to, of course, avoid maladaptation. And there's some examples where there's more awareness slowly being raised, and where those linkages are being built. And at the CGIAR, of course, we also work heavily on that topic, and we work with different governments around the world. So we just had a good series of workshops in Kenya and Senegal, where we're working jointly on this common climate security roadmap that should then also help to bring those policies together and align the objectives. So I'll stop here for the moment. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Peter, and certainly highlighting the need for policies to speak to one another, bringing what is climate security and what is security and how does it all link together with agriculture and environment. Driving those things together will also hopefully provide a comprehensive policy framework that we can all really work towards. So, Professor Lal, I'd like to put you in the hot seat now. Thank you all panelists for now. I'm turning to Professor Lal to give us a roadmap. How do we do this? And how do we take it forward? Can we unmute Professor Lal?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I must compliment all the panelists. They made some excellent comments, very much appreciated. I have some suggestion to reconsider. One of the comments made was that we need to produce more fruits and vegetables than we already have. I think that is absolutely right. With the growing population, increasing the affluent population, we certainly need to do that. But at the same time, we must not forget that the grains we lose globally about 30%. Fruits and fresh vegetable we lose globally by wastage probably 50 to 60%, because of lack of processing, lack of storage, lack of value addition, doing something else with fruits and vegetables before they become unusable. So the first priority should be to use better, properly, effectively, prudently what we produce, rather than to emphasize produce more. If food waste was a country, and especially fresh fruits and vegetables, it would be the third largest global emitter of greenhouse gases. In Europe and North America, the per capita kilogram of CO2 equivalent emitted annually is almost 900 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. And the same in Europe. Asia is slightly less, but I think I am fully agreement with produce more, but let's use better what we have and not waste it. So that's one part I'd like to make. The second part, I think everybody agrees that farmers should be rewarded. We also agree to reward for water conservation, quality, carbon sequestration, improving quality of the soil through management of organic matter content. I did not hear anybody say how much they should be rewarded. What the societal value of the ecosystem services that they create, which are good for the planet and for the humanity. I think that is a part which we need to discuss. Carbon, for example, some companies are paying $6, $8 per credit. We people who are in the academic think it should be somewhere between $30 to $50 per credit. So coming up with the right price, the word subsidy, I think we should pay ecosystem services on the societal value rather than subsidies, and some of the subsidies have been misused. For example, electricity for irrigation water in some cases, free nitrogen or low nitrogen cost, but no equivalent application for phosphorus and potassium that lead to nutrient imbalance. So let's try to think of how could subsidy be translated into payment for ecosystem services. My third question is that the policies are definitely needed in drylands, but policies must be pro-nature, pro-farmer, pro-agriculture, and pro-woman. That is very important. Pro-agriculture, and a lot of majority of the agriculture is done by women in these areas. So pro-women, empowering women farmers is a very important part of the policy. I think maladaptation have been many examples. I already mentioned flood irrigation. I mentioned practices which lead to burning of crop residue. I know practices which promote plowing rather than no-till conservation agriculture. So somewhere we have to take stock of what we have been doing, which has not been productive, which have not resulted in the further advancement of the Sustainable Development Goals, which we got only 7 years left to achieve them, and many of them are not on the track. And what can we do in the next 7 years to put Sustainable Development Agenda on the track? Thank you, moderator.
Thank you so much, Professor Lau. It's still quite a high mountain to climb, but it's nice to have way markers now that we can kind of work towards. So that's really supportive policies that are pro-agriculture, pro-women, pro-women's empowerment, as well as the agripreneurship, certainly tying together the public and private options. Ali, I'd like you to share a bit on what you've heard so far, if you'd like to go ahead. Thanks, Professor Lau.
Hello. Well, first of all, to thank all the panelists. And I think Professor Lal gave us a number of points, and I want to maybe echo some of the points that have been raised from the perspective of the CGIAR and the kind of things that we're trying to do. And maybe like Dina did share one or two country experiences. First, I think some of the most important technologies that are available today, such as conservation farming, has not been sufficiently scaled out across the drylands. And here I want to cite the experience of Morocco, which has seen probably the drought of the century. Michael Baum is there, the director of research who's based in Morocco. Really, and there are projections that this year will also be potentially another difficult year. Now, conservation agriculture is a technology known to many of you, and for reasons it has been practiced, but there has been resolve by the policymakers to really conduct the appropriate research on the ground and demonstrate to farmers the additional gains that this will bring, that it is indeed a profitable technology to promote. It has both environmental benefits but also economic benefits. And the government of Morocco has put in place the right incentives, because with conservation agriculture you should expect the first 1 or 2 years to have reduction in yield before you really start to go upwards. This has had an enormous benefit, especially under extreme drought conditions. So that's my first point. My second point is on pulses. I think a very strong message, Professor Lal, that we should really use well what we have and build on it. The best crops for the drylands are pulses. So the question is, how do we make them more fit for the future? One of the challenges that we have is that they are labor intensive. So the ICARDA is working to actually produce some lentil and chickpea varieties that can be mechanically harvestable. So the government of Egypt wants to produce lentil on large scale in the southern parts of Egypt, but this is the area where the availability of labor is a big challenge, especially under high temperatures. So if you're able to produce mechanically harvestable lentils, you should be able to roll it over a large area where the water is available. You have a crop that is much easier to store. It doesn't perish quickly. It's very nutritious, up to 32% plant protein. And then you contribute to the nutrition agenda, you contribute to the climate change agenda, you're able to reduce the gap in terms of food imports, because of course, you know, lentil is among the big things that Egyptians eat and also import at the same time. The last point is the question about how you bring in all of this together. Traditionally, the systems approach to research has been a very challenging and a difficult area. And even within the CGIAR, we have had tough experiences bringing those components together. This, in my view, and I'm not, I'm fairly new. I mean, with 5-6 years in the system, that's by CGIAR standards considered still new. I think scientists have been avoiding going into that space because of issues around attribution, how the system components interact with each other, how do you actually look at the socioeconomics, how you look at the viability, and then sometimes the system becomes too complex to actually conduct and ask the right questions. I think in the CGIAR we've decided and we've resolved to face this heads on. We did not want to lose the opportunity of exploration on account of avoiding complexity. And we feel a lot more assured that we have a number of centers under the overall umbrella of the CGIAR coming together to be able to face and tackle this very difficult problem heads on. I am a personal believer of the future potential of this, and I think we should really exploit it in a strong way. We are currently working on a first phase of this that will be implemented within the Gulf countries, 6 of them, and we've just concluded a major technical conference on co-designing this together. The last point, and not to be pessimistic, but I think for the future, recognizing everything that is going to happen around climate, we should focus on what can we grow and eat it, as opposed to insisting on growing what we would like to eat, whether it's fit for the environment, whether it's possible under a climate change scenario or not. So working on the human side of things is going to be a key element that will help the whole humanity to cope and adapt to impacts of climate change. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Ali. There's a few questions I'd like to ask to all the panelists again, but just in view that Professor Lal, I know you have to leave in just a few minutes. Before you sign off, would you like any quick reactions to Ali's statement, and then I'd like to come back to the remaining panelists, if that's okay.
Thank you. Ali made some excellent comments. Conservation farming is really a major invention, if I may say so, for the last 60, 70 years. But the dryland regions have not made progress in adopting it. And one of the part of the problem is that conservation agriculture is a system-based, and crop residue must be left back. We must have complex rotation, integrated nutrient management, sub-drip fertigation to supply. I think that's a very important part, and the dryland should really benefit from it. And payment to farmer for carbon sequestration, saving water as an incentive to promote conservation agriculture would be an excellent idea. Then integrate conservation agriculture with trees and livestock so that it becomes really a complex farming system. I also fully agree with Dr. Ali Abu Sabah said about pulses. In fact, we should be putting more emphasis on pulse-based diet than on animal-based protein. That does not mean animals are not important. They are very important, but pulses-based diet, cost-effective, water conservative, producing what we can produce in those regions is a very, very important area. To bring all this together, I think we need a very good system where the private sector, public sector, farmer, land manager work together in translating existing science into action. I really liked what Ali said, we should try to eat what we can grow. And this principle has, not following that principle has created many problems. So let us try to eat what we grow in this harsh environment for growing and increasing nutrient immunity. That would certainly improve the food, climate security, and whatever we do would also be good for the planet Earth. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Lal. So I'd like to quickly, before I turn to the floor, I'd really like to pick up on this eat what we can grow or grow what we can eat. So Professor Benton, I was wondering if you could, we talked about this a bit earlier today. So what does that mean? And then what are the additional benefits? Obviously, eat what we can grow while also ensuring that what we eat is healthy and sustainable, which can help diminish other negative returns on the human body.
Yeah, so I think one of the issues is that we've, on a global basis, designed a food system over the last 60 or 70 years which incentivizes growing crops that are not necessarily good for us, particularly calorie-rich crops that can be processed into a wide range of nicely tasting but not necessarily good for your long-term health. And because of those investments at the scale that they've been invested in, it biases the whole system around the whole world about what is available. So when I talk about market restructuring, it is removing the centrality of cheap calories that are so cheap that the rich world can overeat them, throw them away, that waste becomes economically rational, that everybody's diets are converging on 8 major crops. And to go back to this issue of eat what we can grow, that means locally appropriate, diverse, resilient, largely plant-based, but I fully agree with Ratan's point that animals are absolutely essential. But how do we get the incentives right so that a poor farmer in the drylands can grow a local crop and get rewarded as much as growing maize or something for the global markets because of the depressive effect of the very large-scale producers? So it really, for me, it's not just about the agricultural technology, it's not just about the farmers, it's about changing the markets. And, just one final point to kind of pick up on the security aspect. We have lived for the last 30 or 40 years with the prospect of increasing globalization, increasing global integration of markets. And what we've seen over the last 5 or 10 years is moving away from that. We're living in a world of contestation, increasing conflict, undermining the multilateral architecture of cooperation. And if we end up following the current war in Europe with a world that is much more geopolitically fragmented, there might be drivers towards deglobalization, towards regionalization, and that can, in its own way, I hesitate to use the phrase silver lining, but that can help drive incentives for more locally sustainable, diversified food systems and get off this treadmill that you have to integrate to local markets, you only get rewarded by what is available on local markets and so on. So as we look ahead into an uncertain future, it's not just climate impacts, it's geopolitical impacts, it's global trade impacts, and what will be the best, most resilient strategy. That will almost certainly be about a diversification, which at the moment the market doesn't reward.
Great. Thank you very much on that. And so, Dina, riffing on that maybe a little bit, in building on the question we had before and everything we've heard since then, so where else can we expand these models? How else can we think about expanding on either what's done in Egypt or other programs that can be expanded to support whether diversifying food through diverse crop needs, but then really focusing on the food that we should be eating. Go ahead.
Okay, so a couple of reflections, and I'll keep it very short. I think the first thing that we need to keep in mind, and I think this goes back to Professor Lal's intervention about, ensuring that the farmers get rewarded more, is that, I mean, just to put it in numbers, for every $1 that goes to adaptation, $12 go to mitigation. Climate financing, 3% goes only to agriculture, less than that to adaptation. So if we already look at the numbers, it shows you that we do have, we need a seismic shift in terms of financing to be able to really get the results we want. The second point I think that I would like to make is better targeting. And here it goes back to this, eat what we can grow, is community-based interventions, better targeting of dryland agriculture products, and going also to the marketing and making sure that dryland products are also competitive. They're cost efficient, innovations can be costly, so we need to focus on cost efficient technologies. And at the same time, we need to be able to also ensure, I think everybody has said this, is the policies that make dryland agriculture linked to national food security. I think if we look at dryland agriculture products right now, and most of the dryland countries, they are food import dependent, but the policies do not link these products to national food security. And I think that's where, if we turn the discourse there, I think we will be able to see a lot more in terms of investments, but also more appropriate solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think everything is coming back to policy. Everything's coming back to how do we streamline and cross over. And so, Dr. Tarifa, I was wondering, in view of all else that you've heard since your first intervention, and so what kind of funding, what are the additional systems of change that we need to streamline to make this work? In your view, obviously you've shared a lot already about what ICBA is doing, but how do you foresee that, say, public and private financing could better support ICBA's work or act as a catalyst to bring together partnership in drylands agriculture and agriculture research to ensure an integrated and responsive approach to ensure that we meet the need?
Yeah, thank you for this question. I'd like to go back to one of the comments mentioned, which is, again, we can eat what we can grow, and I think it's very much important, and it's in line even with research, because what ICBA has been doing is looking at those crops which are suitable for marginal environment, for dry land, for the natural, it's like more of a natural-based solution, looking at what can we grow and how can we really also strengthen on the characteristics of those crops through technology to make sure that they are adaptable to this type of environment. So that's something that technology and science can support greatly and ensure that the production and the yield and implementation is really gives us the result we're looking for. Back to the financing and the role of donors, I would say, or investors, it is very important to bridge this gap between the private sector when it comes to technologies and the applications that we would like to see in such integrated system. Not every technology is environmental friendly or environmentally effective, and this is really something we can and we should keep in mind, because we currently are paying the price implemented as something would work with the environment, but unfortunately has worked and currently paying the price for that. So what we need to do is we need to have a system where we can evaluate correctly and look at the pros and cons of those innovation that will support our food systems and ensure that the implementation is efficient. It's not about how sophisticated they are, it's not about how expensive they are, but it is about how applicable and how transferable when it comes to the farmers' adaptation, and also how environmental reliable at the same time. We need to have more resources, definitely, because again, for the way forward, we need to make sure that what we promote for and we need to implement is really giving us the return on investment. So there's supposed to be also a proper calculation of what we invest versus on what we produce and what we can get. And I would say the outcome not necessarily always can come in the form of financial or economical value, although they are all linked, because we need to pay attention also to socio-economical, the impact on the social development, the security, the engagement, the empowerment of women and youth that we have already communicated. The PPP, public-private partnerships are key. They're going to transform the solutions we provide. And I think we need to join forces to make sure that the synergy are being adopted and the result is greatly and carefully measured, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tarifa, for that intervention. Certainly, I think the idea about an effective system to evaluate our approaches to make sure what we're doing is the right approach, a kind of reinforcing circle that ensures that whatever we implement today, we can literally reevaluate tomorrow to make sure we're on the right track, to ensure that we don't lose a day in thinking about it. And so I just, keeping on the financing and funding policies, Peter, I'd like to turn to you for the final comment from the panel before we turn to our audience here. So in terms of these policies and funding streams that many of our colleagues here today have referenced, and obviously these funding streams and how they affect implementation for work to support climate mitigation or adaptation activities, how else does this wash down to, say, supporting mending or solving some of the humanitarian crises or challenges that we see as related to the global dry land? So how can we better link these things together to really step back from the research and towards the development, really make an impact very effectively and immediately on people who may be in crisis?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very, very important question. And if we look at the climate crisis, there's not enough funding now, and there won't be enough funding in the future to adapt and mitigate climate change. And then in parallel, we have the humanitarian crisis. We have more and more refugees and people living in hotspots, in emergency situations. So there's a need to align the climate adaptation and humanitarian programming. And also another reason is we know from experience that a lot of climate finance can also do harm or contribute to maladaptation. So that's why it's very important to align those financing streams, because we don't have enough funding, and to avoid maladaptation. So we need climate and conflict sensitive programming. So there's of course positive examples, maybe building on the discussion that we had here, because oftentimes insecurity and conflict, so we're not talking here now about like the full-blown wars or anything like that, but like local insecurities or conflict around natural resources. So what we've been discussing here, more emphasizing on high value crops, on pulses, on vegetables, on fruits, provides opportunity to adapt and mitigate to climate change, but as well it contributes to livelihoods, to income, and this is of course often a source for insecurity, right? If there's a lack of livelihood opportunities and the opportunity costs are higher to join some other less sustainable activities, let's put it like that. And then on the other side, so that was kind of the adding the humanitarian or the peace and conflict side to climate finance. But then on the other side, there's a lot of humanitarian interventions and funding going in social protection. So if you look at what humanitarian organizations do, they call those interventions social protections, but then if you look very closely, then it's about half moons, it's about terracing, it's about planting trees. So climate scientists or climate people would refer to that maybe as climate smart agriculture. So we can see that on both sides there's really a great opportunity to align incentives and objectives, so that humanitarian operation or social protection schemes and climate adaptation can go hand in hand. So we need more long-term sustainability approaches in humanitarian programming also. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, for tying it up, just like bringing in those kind of how do we bring those interventions to really support additional protection and social protection, I guess, as we face climate change and ways that we can work to really work on mitigation to help be a step behind to ensure that the steps that we're making will be implemented effectively in the future and basically prevent potential crises. Before heading to the floor, I wondered if Dr. Ibrahim Daheri, if you'd like to reflect on anything that you've heard today. Obviously, Dr. Daheri is a colleague in this potential growth in the drylands systems approach, and we'd be very keen to hear your view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all colleagues and friends here. I think we have heard this extensive overview on what integrated dryland farming is all about. In fact, in this area of our region, dry farming is really very important to focus on. Specifically, what I have heard this morning is in fact about a whole range of stress-resilient interventions that are required for this type of farming. If we go back and see the binding documents for all or most of our institutions, we are talking of transforming the agri-food systems. In our region, this region in particular, where we have a real problem of land degradation on one side and water scarcity on the other side, I think integrated desert farming remains an option, a feasible option. What I've heard and learned this morning is more on the necessary environment for making this intervention actually outscaled and upscaled reasonably. The issue of creating an environment so that integrated desert farming become bankable, become an investment that can easily be sold to the private sector. And that is a correct entry point. If you really want to upscale and outscale, you need active participants, and starting with the private sector. And when we talk of a private sector, in fact, we are talking on a whole range of small scale, fragmented, unregulated set of farmers. And on the other side, we have those big organized farmers. So this whole range, actually, when it becomes bankable, when it becomes feasible, we can really engage a whole range of key actors who would really make a difference. And I'm on my side, as the Director General of the Arab Organization for Agricultural Development, we are now taking this as an entry point in an important assumption, which is now there is a whole lot that has been said on the adaptation, but we really need to zero in and focus more. In an adaptation, we need to see farming actually being considered in all aspects. I mean, we're talking about finance, we're talking about technologies and the finance for the technologies. This is one technology that we need to zero in and focus on so that at least we make it bankable. We engage a whole range of actors. If we do this, and this is what I always advocate for as being repositioning the agricultural sector, if we can go through land degradation neutrality using and capitalizing on desert farming, we will adopt and adapt more areas into the farming practices, and that in the end we will be talking of a big carbon sink in this area, and we can really go hand in hand with the in the negotiation table by saying that more and more of adaptation will really take us into mitigation strongly if we can work strongly on desert or bringing in more and more of the deserts through land degradation neutrality. That is an issue that we should not, we should spend all our effort to convince others to work with us on it. So I really see an option for our region through integrated desert farming that we really expand much and much on adaptation and also engage a little bit into mitigation. So that's one thing that I would like to share with you. And I think more and more of a discussion on this one will help us to zero in and come together through sort of a partnership and platforms that will help us to actually work more and more on this system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Duheri. And I should have introduced him appropriately as the Director General of the Arab Organization for Agriculture Development. So if I can hang on to the panelists for just a few more minutes, I was wondering if there are any questions from the audience. You've heard a lot today, maybe some interesting things, maybe some not interesting things, maybe some new things. Yes, at the back.
Hi, I'm John Bonifacio from Center for Environmental Concerns in the Philippines. Very different context, but at least so far. So I would just like to ask about how much do existing agroecology or agroforestry systems in communities in these dryland areas factor into the development of these integrated desert farming systems? And what are the role of governments and other institutions in scaling these up? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. Which of our panelists would like to take it? Ali?
Yeah, thank you very much. Excellent question. Actually, the whole concept of desert farming is not new in the sense that it exists in the oasis, where you have multiple systems with the date palm as the tall trees, the shorter ones, and then even some perennial crops or vegetables on the ground, and dependence on the water. What is new here is that you are taking it to areas outside the oasis, and you try to bring the learning from the oasis system, and to the extent that this is applicable and feasible, you introduce it and you use groundwater, and you try to bring from the oasis parts of the systems that would eventually work. So sort of like option by context, I think, which is very much practiced within CGIAR in so many different ways. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else have a question? And then I'll let the panelists go. Just one question. Sorry. Yes, I know. Just
Yes, hello. I am Khushbu from Falcon Association and youth representative from World Farmers Organization. So, I understand figures like we were talking about incentives. So I want to know, in terms of figures, the amount that you can propose as incentives, even tentatively, at the table for the farmers. So what is the amount that you can propose as a reward for the reward system? Yeah.
I'd like to give that to Dina, if she doesn't mind answering. Thanks.
That's quite a tough question. Even governments find it difficult to respond to. But again, like I said earlier, there's a lot to take into account, which is context specific. So we have to be, Professor Lal says, we give $6 to $8 for farmers for the credit, right? But maybe it needs to be more. Now, if I look at the governments that we work with, let's say, if we take in our region, which is Near East North Africa, when you come to water, use of water, it's almost free, But actually to make it effective, cost-effective, to make it bankable, to make it, sustainable, we need to start charging for water use. And here the tariff for water use, we've been saying, it needs to be, they charge, for example, in Egypt, maybe 30,000 Egyptian pounds annually for the farmer to irrigate, one feddan. But maybe that's too little. So we've said, no, you need to have the tariffs that can then make the cost of delivery of the water sustainable. So it has to be calculated. I can't give you a $1 sort of response, but you have to calculate how much does it cost me to deliver so that I can charge to make sure that we can make this sustainable.
Please, Professor Benton.
Just following that up, if you look at the social cost of carbon, it's not $8 or $50, it's $200 or so dollars. If you build in from a food system perspective, the cost to health from poor diets on a global basis, it's up to about $600 per ton. So if we ever get to the point where we internalize the external costs that we put onto the environment, farmers should be getting rewarded for doing the right thing in a very, very significant way. And at the moment, the market does not reflect any of these social and environmental costs in anything like the real way. So when we're talking about transformation of the food system, it's not about saying to farmers you should produce less. It's about paying farmers to produce less but more profitably to drive things in the right direction. And that requires a huge amount of political will, particularly from countries in the global north who have the power in the global food system because they are the breadbasket owners and they dominate the markets and the trade and all the rest of that. And whether or not that will happen depends on the politics of our social response to climate change over the next few years, and youth are very much important in that debate.
Great. Thank you very much. Do we have one more question? One very important question, stage right, and then we'll close.
Hello, just a quick question. I'm Margherita Tranchina from Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna. I'm a PhD student, and I would like to know, in your opinion, which is the biggest knowledge gaps that need to be filled in the next 5 to 10 years regarding agroforestry systems, mixed farming, so basically crop and livestock, in drylands. So just a quick overview of this. Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the biggest challenges for farmers today, as far as relates to climate change, is the climate variability. The seasons have changed, the rainfall patterns have changed in terms of intensity and timing. We know a lot about climate global models. So at the global level, we know what's going to happen, many scenarios. Even possibly at a regional level, there are still some information. Where the huge gap is at the national and local level, because that's the level of information that farmers need for them to be able to run farming as a business. So there has to be major investments in scaling down climate models to national and regional and local level. If you do that, then the system that we heard about yesterday, the early warning system, can really use this information and warn farmers about a weather event, positive or negative, and that becomes the basis for action. Thank you.
Great. So in summary, I think we've come to the conclusion that we need to find a way to incentivize our farmers to make them take up research options that really transform how we eat, what we eat in the face of climate change. We need to help them make more profit, while at the same time only growing what we eat, and that we'll only be able to really achieve this through effective policies at a transdisciplinary nature. Thank you very much to the panelists. This has been really interesting, and thank you also to the audience. It doesn't matter if you come from the more wetlands. I think there are many technologies that we can scale globally, and I think partnership globally or across regions and countries and institutions is the way we'll achieve this. Thank you so much for attending.
Recording